So how did YVR get into this system? It seems like an odd thing for an airport to get into. So back before kiosks were around, this was probably something that you were familiar with if you went into YVR's airports. The crowded custom halls like this were pretty much a daily occurrence there. I still remember the days running off the airplane, trying to beat the lineups and get in front of the queues here to get up and out of the hall as quickly as I can. So basically, the only way an airport can deal with a situation like this is to make the halls bigger and bigger and add more officers at the booths. So a very expensive proposition for an airport to implement something like this. So in 2008, YVR, in conjunction with Canadian Border Services Agency, they decided to develop a system to basically automate this system. The automation wasn't there to replace the officers, but it was there to facilitate the administrative tasks that they do on a day-to-day basis. So collecting that passport information, collecting the declaration form information, things like that. When they launched this in 2008, they launched it at YVR initially. After YVR, they expanded it to Montreal and to Toronto. So since then, they've been operating successfully in those 3 airports to this day. So you might be more familiar with those ones when you return into Canada, because those ones actually still require you to fill out a paper form, feed it into a machine, and then you get a receipt out. It's not the ideal system, but that's the way the 2008 one was developed. 2013, US CBP saw what Canada was doing up there, came up to Canada and offered and decided to work with YVR to develop a similar system for their program. So that started in 2013 with US CBP. And it was a very good partnership with Customs and Border Protection. And today we are operating in quite a few airports, as you'll see. So these are some of the benefits that the APC program can give to you. So for an officer at a booth, they can basically process 4 times as many people now as prior to these kiosks being installed in an airport. Also meant almost 90% less time for an passenger going through the primary inspection process that probably a lot of you are aware of these days. There's a huge cost savings in terms of the space required when you implement the kiosk versus having a hall large enough to handle enough population of people coming through the terminal. And also for the rest of us as well is a benefit in a less time standing around in lineups for everyone else. So all in all, it's been a huge success for all the CBP program. This map will show you where we're at today. So we're basically located all throughout North America and the Caribbean at the moment. So we're in over 24 locations and growing. We're close to 700 kiosks now, and we have processed to date almost 50 million people have gone through these US APC kiosks. That doesn't include the Canadian version, so we're just talking about the US version, but 50 million people since the launch of this program back in 2013 in June, I believe. So this is what you would typically see at an airport, and this is JFK's Terminal T4 if anyone's traveled through there internationally recently. We've got about 66 kiosks through at this airport, and this one in particular is a bit of a pain for us because it's a 24-hour-a-day operation. We've somehow managed to get all the people out of the frame of the picture when this picture was taken and got it cleared up. But typically they're working around the clock, and it's always a challenge when we have to deal with this airport in particular. And this other location is Atlanta's Hartsfield Airport. This is the busiest airport in the world, and it's also our largest deployment of 74 kiosks that was done 2 years ago now. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what the program is and how we've gone about deploying it and where we are today. So the problem, what is the problem with this? Well, for YVR, when this launched in 2013, it started at YVR, grew to Chicago, and they didn't really anticipate the growth to be as quickly as it was. This became a major problem for the YVR IT operations group there because now all of a sudden they're not only supporting YVR's infrastructure, they're also supporting infrastructure from all these other airports. It became an issue of smaller outage windows for the team there and also carrying the risk of if something were to go wrong at YVR would also affect this program and possibly other airports. So it was a risk that YVR's upper management didn't want to have on their shoulders. So they needed to find a resolution to this problem. So this is what the system used to look like back in those days. This was all hosted out of the YVR's data center. And there is disaster recovery in the sense of multiple data centers at YVR, but they're not very far apart from each other, which poses an issue in terms of a geographic DR solution when you're dealing with airports located all around the world, or North America in this case. By the time we finally moved into the cloud, our peak was 10 different airports, and each of these airports, we had to implement redundant VPN solutions, as well as all the extra setup costs and issues that would go around creating these VPN connections, involving network teams, IT teams. So it was quite a bit of a runaround for IT when we launched a new airport in these locations. The other problem too with this situation is that we have kiosks in Fort Lauderdale, for example, there. The connectivity for all of these systems are going back through YVR's data centers, and then you can see over on the East Coast is where CBP servers are residing. So it's quite the jump for a lot of those kiosks to operate in that fashion. Another problem for YVR was the exposure that this was creating from a security standpoint. These tunnels were going into these unaudited and unsecured environments where kiosks were residing. The purpose of the tunnels as well was for the management of the kiosks, but this also posed another problem in risk assessment for the YVR IT. So now the process, how do we get to the cloud? So one of the first questions we had to ask ourselves when we decided to move to the cloud was, does the technical solution come first or the technical partner? How are we going to figure out how we're going to get up to the cloud or wherever this cloud or solution was going to be? If we had gone down the path of finding the technical partner first that would be the experts in a technology that was more suited to them, we'd be under their direction in terms of is the technology that they're going to give to us fit our application's need? So we'd be a little bit beholden to that expertise that we found with a technical partner. So in our case, in our application, the decision was made to look more at the technical solution first versus the technical partner. So that's the path that we went down initially. Now, in terms of deciding what was important for our application, and these decision factors are going to be different for everyone's project, everyone's application that they happen to be running. But for our particular application, what we are running here at, for the APC program, these are some of the deciding factors that we had started looking at. So number one is the control aspect. How are we going to be able to control the kiosk infrastructure? Are we going to have the tools and the management capabilities to make the changes in the small detailed changes that we wanted to make when we needed to make them? So that was a very important factor for us to determine if the solution was going to fit for us. Transparency. How transparent and forthcoming is that partner going to be to us? Are they going to share with us the details about their infrastructure, about some of the hardware that they happen to use? Are they going to tell us when issues do occur what exactly happened rather than just saying that there was an outage and it's resolved now? So again, another issue that we wanted, or another deciding factor that we wanted to have up front. Obviously, security was of utmost importance to this. We wanted to make sure that the application that we put up into the cloud was going to be secure. USCPP obviously was going to be watching us very closely with this, so we wanted to make sure that the solution that we put up there was as secure as possible. Data sovereignty. So this is an interesting one. When we initially launched this, the data center was in Vancouver, obviously Canada. So all the data of the USCBP program was flowing through our Canadian data center and then back into the US, which was a bit of a problem considering the program was designed for US government. So this was one of the key factors in determining the solution that we implement needed to have a US soil data sovereignty issue forefront. So for myself personally, this has been a new thing to worry about. So typically in Canada, we worry about keeping our data out of the US market. In this case, we had to figure out a way to keep it in the US market, which is infinitely easier to do. And the other one was scalability. So are we going to be able to, with this technical solution, are we going to be leading the business or are we going to be lagging behind it when something changes or they make a decision or they sell it to somebody? We want to make sure that we were scalable enough to be at the forefront of those business decisions. And then finally, support. Are we going to find the proper vendors that are going to support us from the start of this project all the way to the end? So these were some of the initial options that we looked at back in those days. Once we knew what our technical requirements were, we started going down this path of looking at who was out there in terms of cloud providers. Obviously, Amazon was the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and everyone knew of them, so that was an easy one to add to the list right away. Now, they all had their pros and cons. However, obviously, considering where I am today, Amazon was the one that we stayed with. Now, Microsoft Azure was an interesting prospect back at that time. However, the way they designed their network wasn't from an infrastructure as a service platform first. They designed it more from an application as a service. It didn't really quite fit into our control mechanism or control requirement. Therefore, that one didn't quite meet our needs. Also, too, back in those days, the VPN requirements that were available within the Microsoft Azure platform were not quite as good as what you found in Amazon. So again, another knock against their system. So anyways, in the end, it was Amazon that won. So once we knew our technical solution, the search was on for a technical partner. So one of the things that we needed to look at when we were trying to find this partner was, are we looking for someone that was just there during the architecture and design phase, or do we want someone to be around once we go to implement the program and even beyond? So that was one of the fundamental decisions we wanted to make in finding a partner, is that we wanted someone there from the start to the finish. So doing the architect, doing the planning, as well as holding our hands during the implementation and even post-migration phase. They need to be technical leaders with the application too. We didn't want somebody that had Amazon as by the way, we also do Amazon cloud migrations. We wanted to make sure these guys were the leaders in Amazon, that they knew what they were doing, they lived and breathed it. It wasn't something else that they had on their side of their desk that they were managing at the same time. And also too, it was a deep bench that we were after. We didn't want a single person being the spokesperson for Amazon without the other people there having much experience with it. So some of the key factors that we were looking at. Now, the last one was interesting in that at the time, we weren't really looking too much in that this partner wasn't going to be somebody that we had foreseen being around after the fact and being there for the next few years in terms of helping us with the operations support of things. However, obviously in the partner that we selected there, TriNimbus, that happened to be the case, and they're still there with us today in terms of the support and maintenance for the system. And had I known now what I know back then, I would say that actually is a very important aspect of finding a good partner, is somebody that's going to be able to offer you that 24/7 operation support as well, not just the architectural stuff, but also the support after the fact and ongoing support of the system. So we're finding that with TriNimbus. I think that they've been an excellent partner for us, and we're quite pleased with that relationship, how it's gone. So hopefully I've paid for my lunch now. Now this is how we got started. So on the design and architecture of the environment, we basically started late in 2013. Like I said, we launched earlier in that year, so it didn't take us long to get up to speed where we found we were already at close to 10 airports there. We were starting to hit that critical crunch and we needed to move. Virtual private clouds, so VPCs. These were one of the very early on items that we had to discuss to take care of the security aspect of this solution. We talked about VPCs quite consistently through the office. It became common lingo around there as we were getting acclimated to the AWS environment. And then also cloud formation. So one of the first things that you do with a migration to the cloud is you build a proof of concept, and that proof of concept had to go through our own internal vetting as well as through USCBP's vetting. So everybody had a chance to look at this proof of concept, see how it was going to work, make sure there was no issues with it. And the great thing about cloud formation was that we were able to just replicate that environment once we had it set in stone as to the way we wanted everything configured, and then we were able to replicate that into our staging environments, our disaster recovery environments, as well as our production zones. And then remote kiosk management and support. Now this was a tricky one that we had to find a key architectural decision and how we're going to maintain these kiosks that are going to get dropped into airports all around the country. Previously with virtual private networks, that gave us more options. However, with the way we designed the cloud, we were looking at things as simple direct connection to our cloud environment versus going through virtual private clouds. Luckily, TriNimbus came to the rescue on that one as well and introduced us to a new tool that simplified our management of the kiosk, gave us a lot more tools and capabilities than we ever had before. So that tool has really saved our skin many times, and quite happy with the decision that was made back then. An ability to support the VPN infrastructure. So like I said, a lot of the airports that we deal with typically are very old school technology. They're not into the new fancy things. It's very methodical as to the way they approach security and IT. There are customers out there that still require us to implement VPN technology for this solution, and we need to make sure that that technology was going to work in our cloud environment. So we set it up in the way that we can handle both a VPN customer as well as a direct connect customer into our cloud environment. And I'll just apologize ahead of time too. I can't really get into a lot of the details of the tools that we use here for obvious reasons. Some of the other challenges that we found along the way mainly revolved around the database aspect of things. So the availability of the Microsoft SQL and RDS came at a perfect time for us when we moved to the cloud. We were able to take advantage of that system quite quickly, and it was a good solution for us as we didn't want to get into the managed space aspect of the database end of things. However, being at the forefront of that new technology, we also had the honor of finding a few bugs along the way, so that was a nice thing to come across. Now, some of the little things that you may have found already, or if you're planning on moving to the cloud, you might come across, are things like cross-region replication between your RDS zones. So that was another one that we had a challenge with early on, and we had to find some solutions as to how we're going to move our data from one region to the other for our DR zone. The database replication. So when we initially replicated our databases into the RDS, those are some tools that our database administrators had to get used to, these third-party tools that we had to use to initially set up our databases and move things around with RDS. So just a little bit of a learning curve with that new technology. And then the inability to have any linked servers within our RDS environment. So the ability to link to a RDS server was there, but to link out from that RDS server was not available to us. And then obviously the reporting services, there's no reporting services within RDS. So those are just some of the little nuances that we came across. Obviously, they weren't make or break decision when it came to RDS. We really wanted that managed service infrastructure in place, so we went with it anyways, and we found workarounds for all these other issues that we came across at that time. Now, some of the tools that we used, so with a new environment, you're going to find new tools that you can take advantage of. New Relic being one of them, and I'm sure there's quite a few people here who probably know quite a bit about New Relic. The insight that New Relic gave to us from an application standpoint, and we still use it today, and it still provides a ton of information for us when we're troubleshooting issues, as well as we're forecasting. It was quite a game changer of a tool for us. We found a lot of useful benefits from using it. Like I said, we were able to drill down into individual database calls when we needed to and look at different ways to optimize our information. So that one tool alone was a real great find for us that, again, Trinibus had introduced to us. And then the other main tool that we use up there is the Sumo Logic. So that tool, if you're not familiar with it, it's a way to parse and collect all of your logs from different sources, different servers and things like that. Specifically in the cloud, you're going to have servers that are coming and going constantly. So the fact that you can install the Sumo Logic agent and just pull those logs into a central place, the support people really take advantage of that. And there are a few other tools that we use along the way that I just won't get into right now. So once we finished all of our design, the proof of concept, and we went through the headaches with CBP, and it took us actually almost a year by the time we got everything certified by them, we were able to launch our production environment. So as you'll see here, we have our main production environment on the East Coast, and then we have our disaster recovery located in the West. Now that one change allowed us to have a 24-hour operation that would not get affected from a large-scale regional outage that could have affected YVR previously. However, now with the way the disaster recovery is set up in Amazon, we're pretty much safe. Unfortunately, I'm sure if there's a large enough outage that happened on one coast, those airports would probably be suffering at that time, but the other airports would probably be working. So. Now, some of the other advantages, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, is the VPN connectivity. We were able to still support some of the customers that wanted to retain them on a VPN infrastructure into the cloud and still be on that type of setup. We were able to maintain that technology for them, as well as offer the more simpler direct connection method that we prefer when we're dealing with different airports. So obviously, if we're not doing a VPN connection to a particular airport, our deployment times will further be cut down when we're going to launch our new infrastructure or new deployment to an airport. So it was another great way and great benefit for our sales team to be able to offer these deployment times that are now come down into weeks versus months prior. So once our solution was finished, obviously we started adding our new customers directly into the cloud. So that was a great day once we added our first live customer into the cloud, or airport in this sense. And from there, once the first airport started going live in the cloud, now we had the problem of cleaning up all of our old servers and airports that were residing still on YVR. So that process took several more months to coordinate and move those airports up into the cloud. But I'll tell you, there was quite a lot of smiles on the faces at YVR IT when we moved the last airport off of their infrastructure, and they were no longer trying to maintain their outage windows for us, and they could do what they wanted. So what were the benefits for the AWS system? So obviously, I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of these benefits that the Amazon provides, and for us, it turned into obviously the seamless performance and reliability that the cloud solution provides us. We haven't had any problems from the infrastructure side. I think they've all been self-generated problems to date, so we'll have to do better at that. Now the scalability options, which everyone again is aware of, this was a great example for us, is that in 2015, we launched a new facial validation system at YVR. This was a way for our kiosks, as people were using them, to validate them against the passports that they were using at the terminals. Now this system was a phased-in approach that we rolled out at YVR initially, and by doing that we were able to scale out the servers as we started rolling this out to other airports. So again, an excellent example of how we were able to keep the cost down, keep it to YVR only, and as we were adding more load to it and more airports were getting launched onto it, we would just increase the scale. The other one was reserved instances. So again, that's a great way for cost reduction. You can identify your growth pattern with your application and just go plop down some money for the reserved instances ahead of time and enjoy some of the cost saving that brings around. Obviously, Amazon's continued cost reductions that they announce from time to time is always welcomed by us, and we look at taking advantage of those whenever they come around. And then also the technical advances. So the fact that they're rolling out these new microservices, 5,000 or at least 10,000 since I started this talk, we can perhaps take advantage of those and give us new ways to leverage those technical benefits that they offer. And finally, the other big one for us was the adopted security certifications that Amazon gave to us. Being on a private on-premise solution, it was secure as much as we could make it secure. However, it didn't come along with that security, a lot of these certifications that Amazon has. Those certifications have really made a big change for the sales team when they're making these pitches to airports around the world of how secure our environment, how secure our infrastructure is, and they probably came a long way in terms of instilling some confidence with our customers when they see those types of certifications. Now, some of the problems that we found along the way here. Obviously, when we launched this back in 2013, the exchange rate for the US dollar was much better than it is today. So some of those factors need to be thought about when you're forecasting your budgets for the move to the cloud, as everything is priced in US dollars there. So for a Canadian company, it's something to just keep an eye on. The other one is obviously trying to find a way to minimize the usage of our infrastructure in the cloud when it's not needed. Obviously, our production is used 24 hours a day. However, our staging environments and our disaster recovery environments, we try to keep them at a minimal state to save some money for those systems. We're still trying to find a way when people don't need those systems that they're not actually being used and we're being charged for it. So I think there's a few new tools that Jared and team are actually investigating for us and might have some options for us to find some more cost savings around that. And then finally, the auto-scale health checks and the dreaded death spiral. So I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, but for our particular case, we can get into a situation if you have a runaway application or something that's not working quite correctly from an application standpoint, it could cause a snowball effect on your service infrastructure if you're using auto-scale groups and your health check windows are not properly tuned. you run into a situation where the server that's having an issue gets dropped out of the auto group, a new one is brought up, but if it doesn't pass its health check, that one too will get dropped and another one will get brought up. So that can continue until somebody intervenes in those situations, and it could potentially cause some service disruptions or outages for you. So it's something that you need to be aware of in those situations. And the future. So where is YVR going with Amazon? Well, one of the key programs that US CBP employs is the idea of these pre-clearance facilities. So these are facilities for US border inspection in foreign countries. I'd like to think of it as a way that the US is taking over foreign countries a couple thousand square feet at a time because they become US territory at that point. But you can find these throughout Canada, the Caribbean, they go to Europe and Middle East as well. They have these pre-clearance airports. Now these pre-clearance airports, as they're getting announced all the time, they want to get on the APC program and have these kiosks set up in those locations. Obviously, having a kiosk set up in Dubai, for example, would be a bit problematic on a typical infrastructure. However, with the Amazon cloud and their network options that we have in regions around the world, we have a few different options of how we can mitigate the latency issues that we would find in those particular airports, as well as other options from an application standpoint that we can take advantage of to just facilitate a better experience for users on those kiosks. And finally, the other one is obviously the upcoming data center in Canada that everyone's heard about. This is going to pose an interesting option for the Canadian system. So like I mentioned, the Canadian system was launched in 2008. A refresh was promised for that system since I started 3 years ago at YVR now. It's taken a little while. Canadian government works a little bit slower than the US government. So that system has actually been re-announced now and is coming soon, and I think the Amazon cloud would be a real game changer for the Canadian version. I mean, the Canadian version is architected slightly different than the US version, and I think if we can convince them of the cost savings, the security improvements that a centralized cloud solution could provide them, they could really take advantage of that in the Canadian program. So there might be a trip involved with Jared and some of the team out to Ottawa to do some convincing at some point. So. And that's about it for my presentation. Sorry if it was a little bit short, but if there's any questions on the program or the journey to the cloud, let me know. Sure.
How do you handle your internet or Wi-Fi redundancy?
For the kiosks themselves or for this?
Using AWS services, right?
Correct.
I think that's important to have internet. And if it goes down, what's your next? Do you have like wireless, cell tower?
From an airport standpoint, they're responsible for the infrastructure on their end for the connectivity between the kiosks and our cloud environment. So every airport's going to be different as to how they maintain that connectivity. We don't get too involved as to the specifics as to what they need from an infrastructure standpoint, but we don't use Wi-Fi or anything like that. It's all hard connections for our service. Any other question? No. Sorry, this one.
What's a consideration for data sovereignty for Canadian data? Because now you're moving your data center to the US and you have Canadian data through it.
Correct. Yeah. If the Canadian government wants to look at using this program for the Canadian version of their kiosks, the data sovereignty rules that Amazon puts into place for that new data center that's coming up in Montreal are going to be very important to us. Obviously, without a data sovereignty rule in place, it wouldn't even be an option to bring up that discussion with the Canadian government at that point. Yes?
So you started self-hosted with the AWS. Is there a magnitude difference in cost between that?
We haven't factored in the cost because it's very difficult to establish a cost in a YVR data center infrastructure that is a shared service with a multitude of applications and operational uses. So to even try to start that process would be very difficult. We didn't look at it from a cost standpoint. It was more of a risk aversion standpoint as to why we made that decision to move up into the cloud. Oh, yeah. Yeah, at the time, we didn't need to have that extra overhead of trying to deal with 2 active regions at the same time. We have a very simple model that we employ just from a security standpoint as well, that we just needed a single production zone and a disaster recovery backup. I mean, the fact that you're in a region, you're already cross-replicated between multiple data centers at that point anyway, so there is a certain amount of disaster recovery from a local scale. So the idea of going to a geographical disaster recovery will hopefully never have to come to that, because like I said, it'll have to be something quite major to happen that would take out a full region like that, especially with the Amazon system. Sorry, you had a question.
What was the footprint of the existing system that you needed to migrate to AWS? How long did it take you, and what kind of manpower?
The footprint, like I said, the actual system for these kiosks is quite simple. The stack is very traditional, and as you can imagine, in a corporate enterprise environment, it's very standard vanilla type of applications that we're dealing with here. So the migration process was more about dealing with a concurrency of users in 2 different productions and amalgamating the data, and just about how we're going to move all that data up to the cloud eventually at some point. So the actual application process of getting it set up in another environment was quite simple. The process of architecting that environment, ensuring it's secure, ensuring that it's going to be redundant, and get all the certification from CBP was quite onerous to do. But the actual application portion didn't take us too long. The migration process did take quite a while, because as you can imagine, we have to deal with outages for each airport as we migrated them through. So it's always a challenge, and it took us several months to complete that.